Today, Nintendo graced us with a interview with the creators of The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, of course, series producer Eiji Aonuma, as well as some notable figures tied to Grezzo. So we're going to take a look at this interview and talk about some of the things they discussed in it. There's some very interesting points and a deeper look into the creation and development of this game. But without further ado, let's look into it. To begin, I want to go over who the people taking part in this interview are. Of course, we have Eiji Aonuma, who is credited here as Senior Officer, Entertainment Planning and Development Division, as well as Tomomi Sano, Entertainment Planning and Development Department, Production Group number 3, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the development team inside Nintendo that predominantly works on the Legend of Zelda series, as well as the director of this game, from Grezzo specifically, Satoshi Terada. So these are the people that are going to be talking in this interview, and as we get to their responses, I'll announce who it is that is replying. Hey, if you like this kind of content and would like to support the channel further, consider becoming a channel member. Channel members will have access to emotes to use during live streams and in the comments, as well as specialized badges to indicate how long you've been a member for. All members will have their names shouted out in every single video, and if you join the Townsend's Tavern Discord, you'll have a specialized role dedicated just for you. Now, let's get back to the video. They initially start off with an introduction on who they are. We all know who Aonuma is, of course, but to go over who Tomomi Sano is. She is the director for this title on Nintendo's side. Her role was to manage and coordinate production for this project, suggest adjustments, and then check the outcome to ensure the gameplay created by Grezzo is aligned with the Legend of Zelda series. Next up, we have Terada from the Grezzo side. He originally started out as a designer, mainly doing terrain design and level design, but this was the first time he directed a project. He says, I first got involved with the Legend of Zelda series on the remake of the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. In the previous project, the remake of the Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, I was in charge of the development of the art style, 3D backgrounds, and lighting. This was the first time Grezzo had ever worked on a brand new Zelda game. So Terada is the person that is responsible for the diorama, top-down art style and direction of the Link's Awakening remake. So that is probably a significant reason as to why he is so heavily involved with this brand new original title as well, because he was he was a prominent figure with the creation of Link's Awakening. The interviewer goes on to say, by the way, Sano-san is the first female director in the Legend of Zelda series. What other titles have you worked on in the past? Sano says, prior to this project, my main role was to support the director. As for the remakes that Grezzo worked on, I was involved in the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D, Majora's Mask 3D, and the Link's Awakening remake. I was also involved in Twilight Princess HD, as well as some titles with the Mario & Luigi series released prior to Mario & Luigi Brothership, which is releasing this November. Sano is been a prominent figure in the Legend of Zelda series over the past decade, just going off of her resume here and the games that she has worked on. So, and I think it's also a huge thing here to point out that she is, a co-director of this game, and that she's the first female director for a Legend of Zelda series, which is incredible, and that's awesome, and very, very happy that Nintendo is giving a lot of these other directors and people that have been so heavily involved in the Zelda series before a chance to, take up the reins and provide their own unique interpretations of what a Zelda game is. Aonuma goes on to add, I almost always ask her to be engaged in the Legend of Zelda remakes that Grezzo works on. The interviewer says, I see, so Sano-san is an essential part of the Legend of Zelda games developed with Grezzo. So Aonuma-san, could you please tell us what kind of game this is? Aonuma goes on to describe what Echoes of Wisdom is, and it's more or less just a rundown of what we've seen in the initial trailers, going over the Echoes and the Triwand and the ethereal creature. He says, Tri. You use the phrase, a brand new top-down Legend of Zelda game. What led to the development of a new game this time? Aonuma says, actually, I've always wanted to establish a 2D top-down Legend of Zelda series that's separate from the 3D entries like Breath of the Wild. The game style and how it feels are completely different when the world is viewed in 3D from behind the character to when the world is viewed from a top-down perspective. We wanted to cherish that kind of diversity in the Legend of Zelda series. Amid all of this, we felt that the remake of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening on Nintendo Switch, which we developed with Grezzo, had become our new approach in terms of graphics and gameplay feel. As a top-down Legend of Zelda game for the Nintendo Switch generation, Grezzo had established an excellent way of reviving the top-down Legend of Zelda experience for a modern era, so I thought we could develop something completely new that had never been done before. I think this is extremely, extremely important, and one of the more notable pieces of information that Aonuma gave in this interview. It had long been speculated that we were, operating on two different styles of Zelda, especially in the Switch era going forward. We have the big blockbuster, monumental, genre-defining games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, these giant, robust open-world titles, full 3D, and then you have games like Link's Awakening Remake, and now Echoes of Wisdom. So it very much seems that going forward, this is going to be their mindset with the Legend of Zelda series. There is going to be kind of this split in terms of style with the Legend of Zelda. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I absolutely adore the Link's Awakening and Echoes of Wisdom art style and graphic. I think the gameplay direction of blending those more open and free elements that we see with the 3D titles into the 2D ones makes for a very interesting concept, and we'll see, of course, when Echoes of Wisdom actually releases here in the next couple days, but I think it's very, very important to note that going forward, this seems to be the blueprint that they are working with, and it seems like this might be the art direction and style that they kind of stick with, so all of that's probably going to hinge on how successful this game is. There's no telling how well this game is going to do, because every Zelda game on the Switch does incredibly well and sells more than you could ever think. So I think Grezzo might have a very, very busy future with the Legend of Zelda. Most of the Legend of Zelda games that Grezzo had worked on until this game were remakes. Since you were creating a new game this time, did that significantly change how you worked with Nintendo? Aonuma says, yes, there naturally was quite a lot of change. To mention a major change at the start of development, we asked Grezzo employees to pitch internally their ideas for this new Zelda game. More specifically, we asked Grezzo, if you were to make the next game, what kind of game would you like it to be? We had the opportunity to hear ideas from members of Grezzo, which they came up with freely and proposed. Terada says, it was a big event for Grezzo. After all the remakes we had been working on, this was the first time we were challenged with a new game project from the conceptual stage. There was even a time when every single one of Grezzo's employees was thinking about ideas. Thanks to this, we came up with so many ideas that it took us 3 days just to go over and review them. Since it was a Legend of Zelda project, everyone worked hard on proposals and presented them in front of Aonuma-san with pounding hearts. Aonuma says, I've worked with Grezzo for a long time, but when we were working on remakes, we didn't really get the chance to hear everyone's ideas. This time we asked everyone, not only the project planners for the game, but also designers and programmers, to come up with lots of ideas. Sano adds, dozens of people participated, and even though they didn't brainstorm together or anything like that, surprisingly a number of similar ideas were proposed. But that's not a bad thing at all. I think everyone had a common idea of something they wanted to do in the game, and it just perfectly suited the world of The Legend of Zelda. Terada says, so we went through the ideas that came out of the pitch and picked out a variety that looked good. From there, we decided to move forward with a focus on copy and paste gameplay, and gameplay that combines top-down view and side view. Aonuma says there were two basic elements, and from there, I asked them to think of ways to add some freedom. Having worked on games in the Legend of Zelda series over the years, we started to feel that fans may not continue playing this franchise unless they can think independently and try various things freely on their own, rather than following a set path. Even when it comes to solving puzzles, in a game in the Legend of Zelda series, having the excitement of solving puzzles in your own unique ways makes the game Legend of Zelda-like. Hence, we need to increase the degree of freedom to achieve that. With this in mind, I asked Grezzo to use those two elements as foundation for gameplay and add freedom on top of it. I think this is another huge thing coming from Aonuma. You know, a lot of fans, especially after the release of Tears of the Kingdom, were a little disgruntled with how the game was presented, how open it was, and there's just been a general consensus with the Switch titles, with a select few, a part of the Zelda fandom that these games aren't Zelda games because they are way too different compared to previous Zelda games. And that is not the philosophy that Aonuma has. And that was very apparent with the creation of these games and the interviews, especially that were coming out when Tears of the Kingdom released. They fully want these games to be unique experiences for every individual person that plays them. They are, it seems to me like now more than ever that they are really, really trying to steer away from the linear, guided path type of game, and they want to create a game that has all these different possibilities and opportunities for you to create your own unique experience. This is Aonuma doubling down on what his philosophy has been for the last decade of Zelda games. So I think that's just further confirmation of where his mindset is with the Zelda series. Some people are really going to hate that. I personally don't mind it. I really, really like this style of Zelda. So for me, I don't find an issue with it, but I know a lot of people who read that are probably going to be a little disappointed that it seems like this is just still going to be the mindset going forward. The interviewer goes on to ask, so after the large-scale pitch for ideas, 2 foundations were set. What kind of gameplay did that translate to? Terada says, we were exploring a few different ways to play the game in parallel. In one approach, Link could copy and paste various objects such as doors and candlesticks to create original dungeons. During this exploration phase, this idea was called an edit dungeon because players could create their own Legend of Zelda gameplay. Aonuma says, they showed it to me and told me to give it a try. As I played, I started thinking that while it's fun to create your own dungeon and let other people play it, it's also not so bad to place items that can be copied and pasted in the game field, and create gameplay where they can be used to fight enemies. That was the beginning of the gameplay using echoes. The gameplay was shifted from creating dungeons up until then to using copied and paste items as tools to further your own adventure. So this is a big thing because this was confirmation of a Zelda dungeon creator, which was a thing that many people have wanted, and especially since the Link's Awakening remake, this was an idea that was tossed around a whole lot. So this game actually started off as a dungeon maker, and they go on to say in this interview that this idea was scrapped ultimately to pursue what is now Echoes of Wisdom. And I think it's very funny in this next section of the interview, just what the development life cycle looked like for this game and when they decided to change the core idea. The interviewer says, so that's how the idea of using echoes was developed. Did you make this change in gameplay early on in development? And Aonuma just goes, Sano says, it'd been about a year since we started prototyping with the edit dungeon idea. So a whole year of development for this game was tied to this being a completely different idea. So it just goes to show you the life cycle and how game development can change even deep into a project. Terada says, it had been that long. Upending the tea table after a year, added Sano. Aonuma says, everyone else was developing the game with dungeon creation in mind, but I was right next to them thinking of something different. He laughed. But there's a reason it took a year to upend the tea table. After all, you can't really see the potential for ideas to develop into a solid gameplay until you can verify features and their feel, so I wanted them to try making it first. I felt that the edit dungeon feature they showed me had significant potential to be developed into a new way of playing the Legend of Zelda games if the gameplay was changed to use echoes instead. So I thought it would be good to expand in that direction and could be even more interesting that way. However, there was one concern. Even though game consoles have larger memory capacity nowadays, the more things players can copy and paste, the more game memory is used up. I was really worried that it would crash the game. The interviewer adds, but wasn't it you, Aonuma-san, despite that concern, who ultimately made the decision to upend the tea table, so to say? Aonuma, it certainly was, he laughed, but I thought we could make something more interesting if we pushed harder. I wasn't sure how far we could go, but in the end, it was amazing to see how many echoes it was possible to create in the game. Must have been difficult to manage the game memory. So, if you were looking forward to a Zelda maker, you can blame Aonuma. Sano adds, I did notice from the very beginning that copying new things is a lot of fun in itself, The edit dungeon concept involved copying various things during your adventures out on the game field, then bringing them back to create a dungeon in a dedicated place. When I was on this adventure of collecting things to copy, I noticed that I pasted something that was only present in the side view perspective into a location with a top-down perspective. It worked just fine. In 2D games, even if an object looks the same, it's often made and used completely different between top-down and side view. But Grezzo created a single object that would function in both views. The interviewer asks, the same object could be used in multiple points of view? Thano says, yes, it's the same object, but it seems to work differently when you look at it from another angle, which is interesting to us. For example, in The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, there's an enemy called a thwomp that falls from above and crushes things below, and only appears in the side view perspective. If you copy that and paste it into the top view, you can drop it from above and crush things below, or conversely, you can ride the thwomp and use it to climb upward. I was surprised to see that even though the functions are the same, you can use it in new ways just by changing the viewing angle. Aonuma says that felt outrageously fun. Sano continues, I thought to myself, wow, I never knew this was possible. Of course, creating dungeons was fun, but being able to copy various objects and use them in different places was even more fun. Were the developers at Grezzo conscious of combining top-down views and side views even when prototyping the Edit Dungeon gameplay? Harada goes on, after we finished developing the remake of Link's Awakening, we really liked its world, so we talked with Nintendo about creating the Edit Dungeon concept, which we were prototyping back then. In a similar vein, since the remake of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening had areas with both top-down and side views, naturally everyone at Grezzo assumed from the start that we would create both top-down and side views in its title. However, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening is set out on an island with a similar map size and was a remake, so it was limited in terms of what could be added during development. So for this new game, we created the prototype with the idea of expanding on what we wanted to do. Aonuma says, when you encounter a thwomp on a side-scrolling game, it looks like a thin rectangle as you can only see the front of it, but when you look at it from a different angle, it looks like a giant rock that makes a loud crash when it falls. Its presence as an object is completely altered. Sano says, even if you use the exact same function, changing your perspective can help you better understand how to use it. A question like, how high does this object go up and down, is easier to check with the side view, and how big is this object has a clearer answer with the top-down view. As we progressed through development, we felt the changes in perspective made it twice as satisfying. So in this section, they were basically just talking about how the different perspectives of echoes can, further shed light on how they can be used in the gameplay elements. They use the thwomp as the example here, and like Sano was saying, you can see the different functionality that you could get out of it from a 2D level from that perspective versus a 3D one in the overworld compared to the side-scrolling aspect. The second part of the interview goes on to talk about being mischievous. It sounds like you can create echoes of lots of different things in this game. How did you approach creating roles for each of them? Did you set any kind of rules when coming up with ideas? Terada says, we struggled with ideas for echoes. Since the gameplay involves copying and pasting things you'd find in the game field, they have to be something that can help and hinder you. They also need to work both in a top-down and side-view perspective. Further going into what they were saying about the thwomps. Aonuma says, when you're fighting an enemy, it's advantageous for them to be weak, but if you want to make them your ally, you'd prefer if they put up more of a fight. Naturally, you'll want to have strong allies who can fight by your side, but you'll need to defeat them first. If you couldn't make them your ally, then there'd be no point in having them in the game. But if you recruit one that's too strong, they'd be able to defeat enemies on their own, making other echoes seem inferior. It's challenging to find the right balance. This was a big concern that I had going into Echoes of Wisdom now, was just the balance of the actual echoes themselves. We've seen, just through the trailers and the gameplay that they've showed off before, the different tiers of echoes that you can get and the higher cost that it takes to get them, and that seems to be the way that they're offsetting this. Those more difficult, more challenging enemies that are going to be able to put up a bigger fight are going to cost more echoes compared to something like a Moblin that's not going to be as, tough. Terada says, if an echo is too useful, then it's unlikely that you'd use anything else. We wanted to encourage players to try out lots of different things using a variety of echoes. The interviewer says, you also had to consider the top-down view and side view perspectives when developing the echoes gameplay too. Aonuma says, the water blocks were especially tricky. For the side view, it's fine to simply represent a flat water surface, but for the top-down view, it will be represented in 3D, so we needed to create a cube-shaped water object that appears in the game field. Also, the player has to be able to go inside that water block and swim. We found a way to connect the blocks vertically and horizontally, but when you swam inside, you would fall out from the connections between them. It wasn't working at all, he laughs. Terada continued, it certainly was a challenge, he laughed. Terada then says, then even if we managed to find the right balance between enemy and ally and between top-down and side views, we also needed to consider all the different places where players might use these echoes. Aonuma continued, like what happens if you meet a monster in the snowy mountains and then create an echo of it in a volcano. It was a lot of work to ensure that things worked consistently and that the game wouldn't fall apart if players used an echo in an area different from the one where they'd found it. The interviewer says, even just for one single echo, there are so many different scenarios you need to account for, and there are over 100 echoes in the game, right? Terada says, exactly. Since there are so many echoes at your disposal, we made sure to give each one a specific characteristic so that players would remember what each one does. We wanted players to be able to remember off the top of their heads which echo to use in certain situations. So from this, it sounds like all of these echoes in the game will have some sort of unique gameplay element dedicated to them. I'm sure that there's probably going to be a little bit of overlap with those, just going off of what we've seen in some of the trailers too. It seems like, like echoes of birds, for example, are going to function the same way with like flight, but there might be varying degrees of that where, different types of bird enemies will allow you to, traverse further compared to a smaller one or something like that. That's all speculation, of course. I don't know for sure, but the general idea is that there is going to be a unique experience that each of these echoes are going to provide. Sano adds, having the freedom to solve puzzles by yourself is a key feature of the Legend of Zelda games, but having too much freedom can leave you feeling stumped. We made a conscious effort to clearly define the functions of each echo so that players understand how and where they should be used. We were mindful of designing it so that players could reach the gameplay elements we wanted them to experience without getting lost and confused. The interviewer says, indeed, there wouldn't be much point in having so many echoes if you couldn't make use of them. Sano says, also, Princess Zelda doesn't have a way of attacking directly initially, so there was a tendency for the gameplay using the echoes to just end up being a situation where you watch the things you copied do the work. It felt like they were doing everything for you and you were being made to wait. So we asked Grezzo to adjust it so that players would feel an immediate sense of accomplishment, like, I did it. For example, if you made an echo of a monster, that echo would immediately attack an enemy, just like you swinging a sword. Or if you wanted to light a fire, you could use an echo with that ability, and it would light the fire straight away. We made adjustments like these all the way through the game's development so that these kinds of intuitive responses would feel exciting for players. Aonuma says, speaking of which, didn't the bind ability also come from the feeling of excitement that comes with moving things intuitively? They go on to ask what the feature of bind is. Sano says it's an ability that lets you bind with an object to have it copy your movements, making them move. Conversely, you can also bind yourself to an object to mirror its movement in the same way. Aonuma says there's a trick to moving things you're bound to, and this is one of the action elements of the game. The interviewer says, with not only echoes but also the bind feature, it must have taken a lot of effort to make all of this work and realize the number of possibilities without breaking the gameplay. Terada says it did. At the beginning of the game's development, we were thinking a lot about restrictions on gameplay. Assuming that certain things would definitely break the game's mechanics or stop the game from working properly, we had ideas like being limited to using only 20 echoes in a dungeon. Lots of ideas like these made it so you couldn't do things you had previously done, but it would have been frustrating for players if they couldn't use a solution that worked in a previous situation. So one day we decided to scrap that approach and not impose any restrictions. Aonuma adds, I used to believe that the theory behind games was that being set loose from restraints gives a feeling of freedom and growth. That's why old games were designed to slowly lift the restrictions that there were at the start. For a long time, game developers like ourselves have made games while firmly believing this theory to be right, and we felt safe creating restrictions in line with it. However, the Echo's gameplay could fly in the face of this theory at times. When you're actually playing it, it can be more fun not having the restrictions in the first place, and so we asked ourselves, what do we want to do about this one? Shall we remove it? And then gradually began removing those restrictions over time. Most of these restrictions we thought were necessary at the start of development were no longer needed. It even led to us allowing things we worried at first would provide too much freedom. It's strange, isn't it? It's almost as if introducing some freedom attracted even more freedom. The interviewer goes on to say, so by removing the restrictions you put in place, the game became something with an extremely high level of freedom as a result. In other words, the right balance came together over the course of development. Terada says, speaking of which, there was also a key phrase we used during development, being mischievous. Being mischievous, the interviewer asks. Aonuma says, we came up with this key phrase because we wanted to do some things that were really out there. For example, if you roll something like a spike roller along the ground, that's a lot of work because it can hit all kinds of things. But if we didn't allow for this possibility, it wouldn't be fun. The development team called these kinds of things being mischievous. Sano says, we created a document explaining what being mischievous meant so that everyone could return to this concept if they weren't sure how to proceed. Terada adds, there were 3 rules. Be able to pace things however, wherever, and whenever you like. Make it possible to complete puzzles using things that aren't there. And Sano finishes by saying, third, being able to use echoes that are so ingenious it almost feels like cheating should be part of what makes this game fun. That's a huge, huge aspect of this game. They built this game with the mindset of you breaking it. That's going to be something that Aonuma alludes to here in a second as well, but they are going forward with the mindset of this game is going to be as free as it possibly can be, and if you find something that you think is unconventional and seems like it could break the game, that was intended. The interviewer says, there's a small note written in a document about remembering the Myam Agana Shrine from Breath of the Wild. Sano adds, yes, in this shrine you have to guide a ball across a board with obstacles to reach the goal. However, before that ball drops onto the board, you can flip the entire board over and use the obstacle-free surface on the other side to complete this challenge with ease. Terada adds, it just slides effortlessly into the goal. Aonuma finishes the interview off with this statement, and I think this is pretty notable. It's like finding a secret trick in the game, just like the old days. If this kind of solution isn't allowed, then it's not fun. When developing Tears of the Kingdom, we talked about how the player can kind of cheat in many places. I'm always really happy when I manage to solve something in an unexpected way, doing something where I'm not sure if it's even okay to do it like that. I guess it ties in with the idea of being mischievous. And that concludes the interview. There will be an additional part coming out tomorrow, so we will take a look over that and see if there is anything in addition to cover. But I think this was a very interesting interview with them, and that their mindset going forward with the Legend of Zelda series seems to be freedom to play the game however you like and to try to break the game. And I think that's very exciting and very fun because that means there's going to be a ton of different ways to approach this game and make for really, really unique experiences. Again, I know a lot of people really don't like that aspect in modern Zelda, but it doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon. But let me know what you guys think. What did you like out of this interview? Was there anything that caught your ear and that you think was of note? Full interview is linked in the description if you want to look over it. It's going to be on Nintendo's Twitter account as well. But that's going to do it, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. We're only a few days away from Echoes of Wisdom. Doesn't seem real that we're going to have a new Zelda game soon, but I'm super, super excited. As always, thank you so much for watching. Consider becoming a channel member if you haven't already. Thank you to the channel members below. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for your continued support. And if you want to become a member, there is the join button down next to the channel name, as well as links in the description for that as well. Subscribe if you haven't already, and if you like this video, please give it a like. That's going to do it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I will see you in the next one.